I now give the floor to His Excellency Jean-Claude Gakosso, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Congolese living abroad of Congo.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Heads of Delegation, it is for me a most pleasant duty to take the floor before this august assembly, gathered here in this house as mythical as it is illustrious, this house devoted to global peace. And I come here to perform that duty on behalf of His Excellency Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Republic of Congo and its government. Madam President, peace, and this is a message we can never hammer home enough, is something to which there is no alternative. It is our profound belief that peace is one of the most valuable goods that has been bestowed upon us by both God Himself and by our intelligence as human beings. Madam President, peace is this invaluable treasure and asset that we share as nations of the world. A treasure and asset that all peoples of the world share and all states in this community of states share. Peace, let us never forget it, is the very raison d'être of this magnificent house that is the United Nations. It is peace that is the driving force behind our regular presence on these premises and our tireless work herein. And yet, what do we note today when we glance across our world and survey the new ideologies arising from this new world? We note the persistence and increasingly bitter nature of tensions between states. We note the re-emergence of tides of nationalism which we thought had been cast aside and left behind in history. We note that sectarian discourse founded on a fetishistic glorification of identity is becoming increasingly widespread. We note that certain social strata are being increasingly contaminated by strains of xenophobia. We see ethnic intolerance, racial intolerance, and the rejection of other. This is sometimes a phenomenon which beleaguers entire peoples. We note that magnificent cultural diversity, which has been canonized here at the United Nations and which is the very wealth of our world, is being called into question. We see that multilateralism is being called into question, despite the fact that it is the very source of balance in international relations. We note increasing signs that the very premises of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose 70th anniversary we will mark this year, are being increasingly cast aside. In the same vein, Madam President, we note the proliferation of conflict at various corners of our globe. Blind terrorism and violent extremism, which often feed off religious proselytism, continue to increase, and we note that such phenomenon now hold hostage vast swathes of territory that have become lawless areas. And all of this lawlessness is fueled by the vanity and geostrategic, geopolitical agenda, which are selfish agendas put forward by individuals. We note that our world is entering into a period of uncertainty and turbulence. And such a development recalls to us the dark period of the 30s of last century. The terrifying idea of a war between states has reappeared in our vocabulary. But this notion of a war between states is being veiled by the euphemism which is a trade war. We're calling it a trade war, but what we're really talking about is a war between states. All of this is happening before our very eyes, Madam President. despite the fact that we all, without exception, belong to this divine and unique human race. All of this is happening before our eyes, despite the fact that we are all inhabitants of this wonderful planet. We're all equal inhabitants with equal rights. Madam President, what can we say about the migration crisis and the terrifying death toll which has seen thousands of human lives claimed by the depths of the Mediterranean? How can we, as the United Nations, gathered here together at this forum of peace and brought together by brotherly spirit, how can we remain passive in the face of such a loss of youth, such bloodletting of our youth, to an extent that we've never seen before in history? How can we remain passive in the face of this tragedy of a continent whose youth is being drained from it before its very eyes? A continent is being drained of its lifeblood, a youth which would be able to build their own destiny. How can we remain indifferent in the face of such misfortune, whose consequences in the long term will catch up with us one day? How can we remain indifferent to so much misfortune and so much grief? Of course, we need to act. We need to act together, quickly and decidedly. We need to begin by working together. The title of this assembly is that of making the United Nations relevant to all peoples. So we need to begin with that process of making right now. We need to work together, Madam President, to build and preserve peace in the world, because conflicts, whatever their nature, trigger consequences, the same consequences everywhere: destruction, frustration, wounds, and deep black bruises. Working to resolve these conflicts is therefore a moral imperative. It is precisely this moral imperative which has for years inspired the tireless endeavours in favour of peace undertaken by our President Denis Sassou Nguesso, who I have the pleasure of representing here today. Moreover, as part of the search for solutions to the serious crisis beleaguering Africa, my country is at the same time the chair of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region and the chair of the Regional Oversight Mechanism of the Framework Agreement of Addis Ababa. My country, in occupying those two posts, has become the very house of key debates on African issues. We are a country in which heads of state summits, ministerial summits, negotiation processes, and debates take place, whose ultimate aim is to ensure peace in the region and beyond. We hold these conferences looking to issue recommendations to our stakeholders and to governments of partner countries. We urge them to shoulder greater responsibility to ensure that violence disappears once and for all from our region and the world, because this violence stymies global development. We are at the very heart of Africa, Madam President. Congo, therefore, from this tribune, wishes to express its satisfaction at the recent developments seen in our neighbour country, DRC, a country called upon to choose its new leaders at the end of this year. The Republic of Congo once again commends the beginning of the electoral process in this country, and we invite all stakeholders in this process to prioritise dialogue, to work together with greater fervour, and to advocate moderation so that all elections, when ultimately held, take place in a climate of peace. Congo expresses its grave concern in the face of the increasingly bitter tide of violence, armed violence, which is rising in the CAR. We call upon rebel groups still hesitating to join the peace process, courageously spearheaded by President Faustin Archange Touadéra. We call upon these still reluctant parties to join this peace process process, and to do so with good faith. It is a process drawing upon the support of the Africa Initiative Panel and other bodies acting as moderators. My country has received a mandate from the High Committee of the African Union for the search for solutions to crises, and the centre with the African Union working on that matter. And we call for peace to be restored across the African continent. Elections will be held as soon as possible in a credible fashion in the DRC, and that is something to be advocated. But we do think it's important to ensure that the United Nations work and role is respected, to ensure that elections, when held across Africa, do not simply add violence to violence. In the Republic of Congo, there is a department called the Pool Department, and we are at the mercy of the last embers of a rebellion, but we have ultimately returned to peace thanks to the efforts of international parties. A ceasefire and cessation of hostilities agreement was reached on the 23rd of December 2017, and this has been increasingly implemented. We should also hail the United Nations and the support they have provided for the rapid implementation of the DDR program for the Republic of Congo, pursuing the ideals of peace and development and the SDGs for the benefit of mankind is a crucial commitment. This is a commitment which means that there must be a greater number of young people and women brought into decision-making processes. Women and young people must play a greater role in the implementation of actions looking to eradicate poverty in all its forms. It is clear that we cannot wait. The time has come now to build peaceful and prosperous societies, but we cannot build such societies if women that constitute half of humankind and if young people, who are the people that will build the world of tomorrow, do not fully enjoy their legitimate rights. It is for this reason that the government of my country today prioritizes these sectors of the population, because their dynamism will constitute the major lever and driving force of economic growth. Madam President, a few days ago, at this same rostrum, the Secretary General of our organization, Mr. Antonio Guterres, called upon the leaders of the world to waste no more time in protecting our planet from the disastrous consequences of climate change. This appeal struck a particular chord with my country, a country, as you are aware, located at the very heart of the Congo Basin forest, a country whose government has endeavored for years to preserve the invaluable heritage constituted by the vast forests on the equator in Central Africa. We strive to protect the invaluable biodiversity that this forest harbors. I wish to call upon sponsors, donors, philanthropists and nature lovers, call upon them from this rostrum. And I wish to call upon our brothers and sisters who are able to do so, who have the means to do so, to support the governments of Central Africa to protect the forests of the Congo Basin. I call upon them to ensure that we're able to bestow clean, pure air upon our generations and upon humankind. From this rostrum, and on behalf of my President, I wish to rouse the global conscience, and I issue an appeal to you all to ensure that we join together in a sacred union under the leadership of the United Nations. We must give strength and breathe life into the invaluable instruments that we implemented following the Paris Agreement, namely the Climate Commission for the Congo Basin and the Congo Basin Blue Fund. Let us give meaning to these instruments. These are two instruments designed to more effectively preserve the water and forests of the Congo Basin forests, the second largest green lung of this world, and vast swathes of terrace. These instruments, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and delegations, these invaluable instruments need our action, our generous action, and our generous contribution now if they are to serve the cause of humankind. We need to make such contributions if we are to protect life itself on this great, unique, and irreplaceable blue planet. Thank you.
Je remercie le ministre des Affaires étrangères.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Congolese living abroad of Congo for his statement.
Je donne à présent la parole.
The Assembly will now hear an address